So the heading here looks good. Let's go back to the application and uncomment the food type .name. This time it will be menu item .name. Let me copy this and paste it about 3 more times for now. Actually, let me paste it 4 times. We have description here. Let's do that. Next we have the price. And then we have the image. Now when we are working with image, this will be a file type. So we do not want the tag helper right here. We will just say type is equal to file. We will give that a name of files, and let's give that an ID of upload box. We do not want any validation. Let me remove that. Now let's go back and refresh and see those properties. Perfect, this is looking great. Next, what we want here is a drop down for category and the food type. How do we implement that? Think about what will be all the categories and what will be all the food type that you need to display. For that, we will have to retrieve a list of all the food types and category from database and assign that to a drop down. So if we go back to our application and if we examine the page model, we only have a menu item. Here we need more properties because we want to store drop downs. So we can add a public IEnumerable of select list item, which is drop down. That is inside ASP.NET Core.mvc.rendering. So you will have to add that using statement and then the select list that we want to call this. Let's call the first one as category list. We will have the getter and setter. We will copy this and paste it again. The next one that we want is the food type list. Now this will automatically be binded in post because we have bind properties on top. So that will bind all the properties that we define in a model. Even if there are more than one properties, it will bind all of them. Inside the get handler, we will have to populate our category list. In order to populate, we will call unitofwork.category.getAll. That will retrieve all of the categories. On there, we can call a select statement and we can do a custom selection. So we are saying that I goes to, we want to create a new select list item. So we want to create a drop-down, but on that drop-down, what should be the text and value? So here we are referencing all of the entities of category with the name of I. You can see here we have all the properties like we have ID and display order. For text, we want to display the name of the category, and for the value, we want the category ID and not the name. So value, we will say I.id and convert that to a string. You can see how simple it is to populate our select list using unit of work. Here we are using projections with the help of select, so that way we are projecting our category and creating a select list item based on text and values from the category that was retrieved. We have done quite a few coding in just 2 lines of code right here. Similarly, we will have to populate our food type list as well. So we will say food type list is equal to, rather than category, this will be food type inside unit of work. So that will populate the drop-down on the get handler. Now once the view or the page is loaded, we need to display them right here. So to display, we will say category ID here, and we do not want an input field. What we want is a select drop-down. So on select, we will use the ASP for tag helpers, and here we want to bind that to the category ID. So menu item.category ID, and when we are working with select tag, we have another tag helper which is ASP items. ASP items will determine the list of all the values possible for the drop-down. and that is inside category list. We cannot access that here, so we can use model dot, and it will display all of the available properties where we populated the category list inside the page model. So we will use that right here. Last here we will add a bootstrap classes here of form select. So our ASP select tag looks good for category. We have validations. Let's add that for the category ID. Now if you want a new field that is added here by default, I forgot the closing bracket here, that we will do in option. So we can add an option here which will be disabled field, and it will be selected by default. We will display here select category. Let me save all the changes and run the application. I just added category right now, but once everything looks good, I will do the same for food type. Let's go to menu item, create, and if we scroll down, perfect, we have select category which is disabled, and we have appetizer, entree, and dessert. We have the display name as category ID. Let's modify that, but before that, inside the insert, let me copy this, paste it one more time for the food type ID. Let me make all of those changes here. Food type list, select food type, and we have food type ID. Let's go to our model, which is menu item here, and we will add a display property to the food type ID and category ID. We will just say food type and category right here. Perfect. Let's run the application and see the change. If we go to admin, menu items, create new menu item, and we have the food type right here. So our view is looking great to create menu item. Now for description, a single line is not sufficient, and I want it to be a rich text editor. So for that, let me close the application here, and inside the browser here, I will search for TinyMCE. Here we have a HTML editor that I want to use. If you examine the pricing here, the core version is free forever. So I already have an account. Let me sign in. I already have an API key that I can use. If you do not have one, you can just sign up for the account and get your own API key. Inside the documentation, you can see they have also given an example on how to use that. So let me copy the script tag that we have here, go back to the application, and right here, inside the underscore layout, we will paste the script file at the very end. I have the API key right here, so that should work. Now if we go back to our upsert UI, let's go back. We have the script tag on how to actually use TinyMCE. So let me copy this, and we need to create a text area. So let's go back to the application, and where we have the description, this will be a text area. And do not forget, with text area, you need an explicit closing tag of text area. If this is not present, the text area will not work. It is not a self-closing tag. Once you make this change, let's scroll to the very end where we have the validation scripts partial. Here inside the section of scripts, we will add a script tag, or rather, let's just paste what we copied. There is a script tag there already, and the selector is text area. That is what we have for the description. So with that, if you run this project now, you will see the fancy editor in action. Let's go to menu item, create, and great, you can see we have a rich text editor with fancy properties that we can use for description. So with that added, if we hit the create button, we already have some validations. We have category, food type, price, and name as required, so we see a summary as well as individual details. While it is running, let's go back. We do not want the summary. We can remove that, and everything else looks good. Now when we populate all the details and upload an image, how do we process that? Let's do that in the next video. When we hit the create button, whatever image we uploaded, we want to give that a new random grid, and then we have to save the URL. The actual image, let's move that inside www root folder. That is the place for all the static files. So let me stop the application here. Let me pin this inside www root folder. Let me create a new folder for images, and inside there I will create a subfolder for menu items. So all of our images for menu item will go inside this folder. Now how do we access the root path of the project, which is www root? We can do that with the help of web host environment, and we will have to get that using dependency injection inside the observed.cs html.cs. Where we have unit of work, we will add a private read-only web host environment with the using statement. Let me call that as host environment. We need to get that using dependency injection, so let me do that. So we have underscore host environment. Let me call that. That's perfect. Then once the image and everything is uploaded, we will be on the post handler. So let me remove everything that we have here, and first we need to get the root path of this www root folder. So we can say here web root path is equal to underscore host environment, and in there we have the web root path that will point us to this root directory of www root folder. Then we need to actually capture the files that was uploaded. So we'll say variable files is equal to http context.request.form.files. We will be getting these files right here, because if we go to observed, we have the enc type of multipart form data. If you forget this, then the files will not be retrieved here. Then the next thing that we have to check here is if menu item.id is equal to 0. In that case, this is a create request, else this is an edit request. Right now we are only working on create, but this is a critical check that you have to make, since we will be handling both the functionalities in this single Blazor page. So what do we have to do when we are creating? At that time, we want to give our file a new name. So we will say file name underscore new is equal to, we want a grid dot new grid dot toString. So we have our new file name because we want to make sure all the file names are unique. Then we will have to find out the folder of uploads. So we have path, we'll do control dot inside system.io, and we will combine the web root path with the path that we want. So that path is inside the images folder. We have menu items. That is exactly what we created. So that will give us the final place where we have to upload our file. We want to make sure that file should have the same extension. So we will say file extension is equal to path.getExtensions, and we want to get the extension of the first file that we find right here, and from its name we can use the helper method to extract the extension. Then finally we will have to copy that file inside the folder. So we will say using here, we will say var file stream is equal to new file stream, and here we will have to give the path. So we will say path.combine. We want to combine the uploads folder, and then we want the file name and extension. So comma, we will have the file name new plus the extension. That will be the location where we need to create the file. Last here, we need to give the permission, which is file mode.create. Using that file stream, let me hide that. We will say files of 0.copy_to. We will copy to the location that we defined in our file stream, which is inside images menu item. This will make sure that the file gets uploaded to our location. Once that is uploaded, we need to modify the image string right here. So if we go back, we will say menu item dot image is equal to, let me add an @ sign to escape that. We will say /images. In there we have menu items, and then we want the file name and extension. So we'll say file name new plus the extension. So the location that we are storing inside image is how do we navigate to that image from the www root folder. So in here there is an images folder, in there is menu items, and then the file name and extension. Once we have that, all the other properties inside menu item will be populated. So we can call unit of work.menu_item.add, and we will pass our menu item. That looks good to create a menu item. Let's add a debugging point here and run our application. Now while the application is running in Visual Studio 2022, we have something fancy. If you right click on the debugging point here, you can add a temporary breakpoint. What will happen is this will be executed once and then it automatically goes away. Let's go to admin, menu item, and try to create a menu item. Let me choose an image there. Category, I'll do entree, vegetarian. Let's hit the create button and we hit our breakpoint. Let's examine our menu item. You can see we have description with paragraph and bold tag here. Category ID, food type ID is populated with the price and name. Image is null right now, but if you examine files, we have one file that was uploaded. So let's continue here by pressing F10. We have the new file name, that's perfect. We will have the uploads folder, that will be on my local computer. Then the extension here, if you examine, this is null, because I believe this will not be name, it will be file name. Let me see that. Yep, right here, it should be file name. So let me stop this, and I'll change that to file name. We will have to add our temporary breakpoint and run the application again. Let's try to create the menu item one more time here. Entree, vegetarian, and create. We hit our breakpoint. Let's do F10. We have new file name. The extension is .png. That looks good. Now before you execute this, let me pin here and open the images folder. Menu item. We already have this particular PNG, and you can see the name here ends in E0. That is the new file name that we have. But right now if you go to this folder and try to open, it will give you an error. That is because it is not written right now, it is about to. So let's hit F10 one more time. Perfect, that should be done. But after we exit the using statement, if we go back and open up, you will see the image that we uploaded. So we will save the image path here. That looks good. And let's add the menu item. We will stay on the same page because we are not redirecting it properly. So let me stop the application, and once everything is done, we will redirect to page, and we want to redirect to the index page. Let me save that. But before anything, let's go to SQL Server and see if the record was created. And here you can see the record was not created. Can you think of a reason on why this happened? The reason is simple. We added the menu item, but did we save the changes? We did not. We forgot to call the unitofwork.save. If you do that, then the record would actually be saved in the database. Let's remove that image, and anytime if you feel the records are not saved or updated in the database, the reason is simple. You must have forgotten to save the changes to database. With that, let's continue from the next video. We are able to successfully create product. What we want to work on next is displaying all the products inside the index page. Previously, we were retrieving everything with the help of page model. But now we want to display everything in a data table. For that, we will have to create an API in our project so that once the page is loaded, we can call that API and retrieve all the data that needs to be displayed in the table. How will we do that? If it was an MVC application, we could have added an API inside the controllers folder in the web application. But how can we add APIs within the AppWeb project now? When you are working with a .NET Core application, combining things is pretty simple. Like even though this is a Razor application, if you want to add controllers, it is very easy. There are two things that we will have to do. First, let's go to program.cs, and if we scroll down to the request pipeline, where we say how to handle any request that comes in, we have to tell the application that now you also need to handle an MVC or controllers within the route. So where we have map Razor pages, we will just add map controllers. With that, the support for controllers will be added in our application, and it will be able to route that correctly. That's all that we had to do in program.cs. Let me close all the tabs here, and we need to add controllers in our AppWeb project. So within AppWeb, we will right-click, add a folder, and this will be controllers. Make sure to name it exactly the same. That is how it will define the route here. Inside there, we will add a controller. Since we named the folder as controllers, you can see here we have the option of adding the controller directly. You can create an API controller, but I will go with an MVC controller because I want to return JSON result. So we will create an empty controller here. Let's give it a name of menu item controller. When you add any controllers, it should always end with the keyword of controller, so make sure you do not break that. Let's add this. Even though we added this as an MVC controller, we know that we want to use this as an API controller, so we can add those two attributes. First is the route that will define what route you will use to access this controller. So we will use API / and then the controller name, which is menu item, and whatever action are inside there. We have the API controller here. That looks good. Using the controller, what we want to do is retrieve all of the menu item and return back. To work with anything related to database, we need the iUnitOfWork using dependency injection. We have done that many times, so let's add that, and I will add the using statement for UnitOfWork. So in constructor, we are getting the UnitOfWork implementation. Then the action method that we want to work on will be HTTP getAction method, and let me call this as get. Here we will create a variable menu item list, and we will use our UnitOfWork.menuitem.getAll. We will retrieve all the menu items. Then when we return back, we will just return back JSON, and here we will say new data is equal to menu item list. So that's the JSON that we will return back from the API. Now let me add a breakpoint here and run the application. Let's see if we can hit this endpoint and retrieve the menu item that we created. In order to hit that, the navigation we defined is API / controller. So we'll say API and the controller name is menu item. Let's hit enter, and great, you can see it hits our breakpoint. Let's examine what is being returned right here. Let's examine what is being returned in the list. Here the count is 0 right now because when we tried to create a menu item, if you remember, we did not save any changes. So let's go back and first let me create a menu item. We have appetizer, non-veg, let's create. Let's go to SQL Server and we have our entry right here. Now if we go back to our application and if we hit our endpoint, which is API menu item, let's see what is being returned. Inside the menu item list, we have one record now, and perfect. You can see we have category ID, food type ID, name, description, and other details populated. But if we take a look at the index page of menu item, let me open that up. Right here, we want to display category and food type. It would not be a good approach if we display category ID and food type ID, because to the end user, the IDs will not make any sense at all. So how can we display the actual category name and the food type name when we display the menu item list? Let me show that to you in the next video. We want to display the category and food type name and not just the ID when we are displaying the list. We have the navigation property, which is category and food type right here. So wouldn't it be great if based on this IDs that we have, we populate the navigation property with all the details? Entity Framework Core has a great way of doing that, and that will be done using something known as include. If we were using the application DB context directly here, it would be easy to do that. But we are using unit of work. So what we have to do is we have to modify some things inside our repository so that when we get all, we can pass here that we want to include category and food type, and based on that, the navigation properties should be populated. We need to make some change and enhance our repository now. Let me stop the application here and open up the repository. We will be making changes inside the root repository and interface. So first, let's go to the I repository. When we are including any properties, that will be a string, and we can separate that string by comma. If we want to include food type and category, we will write them in a string separated by a comma. And we can expect that in parameter right here. So we can say string, let me call this include properties, and this can be null by default, so let's fix that. So here inside string we will define what are the properties we want to include when we are getting all the result. Let's implement that inside the repository get all. So here we have a nullable string which is include properties, and once we retrieve our DB set, we can check here if include properties is not null. I have said before that if there are multiple include properties, we will separate them by a comma. So we can add a for each statement, and we can say variable include property in include properties dot split, and when we are splitting, we want to split it by new character array. Let's give that a comma here, and we can configure some option. The option that I want to configure is split string options dot we want to remove if there are any empty string entities. So right here, let's say if we have something like ABC, comma, comma, XYZ, then the output here will be ABC and XYZ. So it will split that in two for each loop, one for ABC and one for XYZ. And that is exactly what we want. Then now the main question arises is how to include anything on the query. Super simple. We just say query is equal to query.include, and we will say include property because we want the individual property and not the list of all the properties separated by a comma. This include is inside Entity Framework core, so if this does not pop up, you will just have to add a using statement. So with that, everything looks good. But let me scroll up here, and where we have application DB context, let me just show you, if you are using application DB context, how to do that directly. So on _DB, we have menu items, and right here we have the include property, and you will say u goes to u dot. We have the food type, and then again, if we want to include the category, we will say u.category. This is exactly what we are doing inside our repository. You can see this food type and category will be in a string variable, so we will have to pass something like food type, comma, category. And based on that, here we will split that, and we are including each one of them in our query. This will automatically map and load the food type and category based on the IDs that are populated. So if you are using just application DB context in some project and not repository pattern, this is how you can include the properties. With that in place, let's go to menu item controller where we have get all. Now we can define include properties here, and as I said before, it will be a string. Let me write category and food type here, and with that, let's run the application. Now this time you will see an error message, and let me show that first. Here we will call API menu item, and when it tries to include, you will see an error message. The error message says unable to find navigation category specified in string based on the include path category. The reason behind that is this is case sensitive. We had everything in lowercase, and that is why it failed. One way to find out what exactly should be the case is if you try to include that directly on application DB context, you can see the case that is given here. That is exactly how it should be. So let me copy the food type, modify that here. Let's go back, copy the category, modify that, and let me comment this out. With that in place, it should work successfully now. So if we navigate to API menu item, and if we press F10 now, it completes successfully. Let's examine the menu item list here. And great, now you can see category is populated with appetizer and food type is populated with non-veg. So you can see how navigation properties can be handy to display and load data based on the ID using the include statement with Entity Framework core. Now that we have all the data that we want to display, we can use our data table and extract this JSON in a nice table format. Let's do that in the next video. The next thing that we want to do is we want to include data tables in our project. We have the CSS and JavaScript files that are needed. So let me copy the CSS here. Let's go back to our project. We will stop the application, remove our debugging point, and in underscore layout, we first need to add the CSS. We will paste that where we have the href, and that looks good. Then we scroll down where we want the JavaScript. Right here, we will be adding script src is equal to. Let's go back and copy the JS link here, paste that, and with that we have added data tables to our project. Now right now I'm just using CDNs, but ideally you should download this in www root.js and CSS files and then reference them. But we'll just use the CDNs for now. If we go back to datatables.net, you can see how easy it is to use data tables. We just have an ID of my table that we will reference, and on that we will call the .data table. Let me copy this, and we will go back to our project. We will have to create a new JS file. So inside www root folder, we have the JS folder. Let me add a new item here, which will be JavaScript file. The name of this file will be menuitem.js. Inside the JS file, let me paste what we copied. So here we are looking for an ID with the name of my table. I can change that to dt_load. Let me copy this and we will go to our index for menu item. Here we have the table tag, so let me give it the same ID, which is dt_load. Now we need to include our menuitem.js in this index page. We will have to create a section of scripts, and in there we will say script tag src is equal to, inside the JS folder we have menuitem.js. That will include the script file with our index page. Once we have that loaded, let me run the application and show you the difference. Right now we are not calling our API to load the data, but it will be an empty data table. And great, you can see we have sorting here, we have pagination, search functionalities, as well as how many entities we want to display. All of this is done by default. Now the only thing that we have to do is we need to call our API endpoint and load this data table. Let's do that in the next video. Now we actually need to call our API and load the data in data table. We will be doing that inside the menuitem.js. And all of the code that I will be adding in menuitem.js in the next two videos, I will be attaching them with the snippets of the course. In order to get all the snippets, if you have not watched, please watch the video project resources again. There I have shown you how to get all the snippets that you will need for this course. Once you download all the project resources, you will have a folder for snippets. In there, we have section 6 of menu item, and I have the JS file right here. But I will not copy that right now. I want to start fresh to show you what's being done. So when we load the data table here, we have multiple properties. We want to call our API to load this data table, so we will be making an AJAX call. And with AJAX call, we have more properties. First one should be the URL, which is the most critical piece. Since the URL is in the same project, we can directly write /API/menu item. That is the API path that we have given. Next one is the type of request. This will be a GET request, so we will write that, and we will write data type will be JSON. With that, the AJAX request looks good. Now the next thing that we have to configure is what will be all the columns of the data table. And based on the JSON request, when we receive that, what will be the name of the properties. So here we will say columns, and we will have a square bracket where we will have array of all the columns. Each column we will add them inside curly brackets, and first thing will be data. So data will be the name of the property. We are returning menu item, so menu item will have the name property. Let's add that, and we can define what width do we want to give to this particular column. Let's give that 25%. Then let me copy this, add a comma, and paste it one more time. The next property I want is price. For now, let's only add two columns here, and I will add a comma here, give it a width of 100%. Now what we are doing so far is not perfect. If we go back and refresh, we will see a very common error message with data table. I have intentionally shown this error to show you what is the solution. You can see the error here is requested unknown parameter name for row 0. Now if we press F12 and if we go to the network tab here, let me click OK, cancel this out and refresh. This time we will have to click OK and cancel that out, and if we go back, To our DevTools, we should have the API call somewhere here to the API menu items. We have that right here. If we open that up, you can see the response that is received. Let me copy this and open this up in Notepad so that way you can see the response. Now here you can see we have a property with the key of name. What we are using in our data table, if we go back, is a capital N. So that is why it was not able to find that. So this is case sensitive, and I wanted to show you if this does not work, how exactly you can see the response in the DevTools and make modifications. So we have name here and price, both of them are in lowercase. So if we go back and refresh, now you can see name and price are populated. The next property that we want is category and food type. Let's go back to our API response here and make sure to notice how it is cased. Food type has a capital T here and category is all lowercase. So this is exactly what you should write. Inside food type, we have the name property, so we can access that. Let me go back here, copy this one more time, add a comma and paste that. First, we have to display category, which is all lowercase as you can see here, and in there we have the name property. So let me copy that. We will say dot name. We copy this one more time, paste it here. Let me change the width for price and other name. And this will be food type with a capital T. That is exactly what we have in the response. I'll add a comma here, save it, go back and refresh, and perfect, our data table is loading as expected. Next, what we want to do is we want to add an edit and delete button in our data tables. For that, we will have to use a render function. Let me show that in the next video. Now we want to display an edit and delete button for our menu item. When we work with edit or delete, inside the other pages, we had to pass the ID. That way we know what particular item the user wants to edit or delete. So in data tables also, it will be the same. We will be working with ID of the menu item. So if we go back here, the next column that we have, let me copy and paste it one more time here. The data will be ID with all lowercase. We can see that right here in our response. So based on this ID, now we want to render some buttons. So how do we do that? Before width here, we have something called as render. And this will be a function where we will be passing data. Data is nothing but the ID itself. So we can use that in our function. When we call this function, we want to return some HTML. And that is exactly why render is being used. We want to render some HTML. Since this will be spanned across multiple lines, I will use the tilde symbol, which is below the escape on your keyboard. So in here, we want to add a div. We will have to manually add the closing div as well, since there is no IntelliSense here. We will have to align that. And within this div, we want to add an anchor tag with href to the upsert page. Because now inside menu item, upsert is responsible for creating and editing. So the href will be /admin/menu items. In there we have the upsert page. When we go to the upsert page, if you go to the page model here, inside the onGet, right now we only worked on create. But when we modify this for update, we will be getting an ID right here. So we need to pass an ID of what entity we want to edit. So we will say $ID is equal to, within the $sign in interpolation, we will pass data, because data here is nothing but the ID of the menu item. Next, we can add some bootstrap classes of btn, btn success, and text white. If you want to hardcode some other styles, you can do that like style, cursor is equal to pointer, and width of 100 pixels. Then we have our bootstrap icons. So if we go back, let's go to bootstrap icons here, and let me try to find out an icon for edit. Let me copy this. We will go back and paste it here with the word edit, and we need the closing anchor tag. Let's add a comma after render. Go back and let me refresh. Perfect. You can see we have the edit symbol right here. If you want, we can remove the text here. Just the symbol is good enough. Let me copy this one more time and we will paste it again, this time to delete a category. So the class name will be BTN Danger for the red color. We go back to the icons here. Let me search for a trash icon. We will copy that and I will paste it right here. Let's go back, and this looks much better. Now since this is in 2 lines, if we go back and inside our div, we can add a class of width 75 BTN group. And perfect, this looks much better. Let me go back here and I will just add margin X of 2. If you want, you can remove the style here. I do not think that is needed. So let's remove that and see how this looks. That looks much better. Let me do that right here. We will just add margin X of 2 and perfect. This is much better. So with that we have edit and delete buttons. But delete right now, it's taking us to some href that is not configured. We will fix that in the later videos. But right now, what we want to work on is the edit functionality. Let's do that in the next video. We want to work on the upsert functionality to edit any of the menu items. So when a user clicks on the edit button, what should it do? If you hover here, you can see the navigation link. It displays upsert with an ID of 1. So let me open up the upsert.cshtml.cs. I already have it here. On get, we might receive an ID, so that will be a nullable field. Then in here, we will have to check if ID is not null, then this is an edit request. It does not matter if it is edit or create, we still have to populate our dropdown, so that will stay as is. But if this is an edit request, then we will also have to populate our menu item and load all the details from database. So we will say unit of work.menuitem.getFirst.default. We will load that based on the ID. So u.id is equal to the ID. With this small change, let's restart our application and try to test the edit functionality. Let's go to our menu items and hit the edit button. Great, you can see our description, name, everything is loaded with the category and food type. This is exactly what we selected for the menu item. One thing that needs to be updated is the button here should be update and not create. Let's go back to the application. That will be inside the UI. So we have upsert. We have this logic to toggle the text. Let's scroll down and paste that right here. If we refresh, now it should be update. So perfect, the get functionality on update looks good. One small thing that I would like is when we are updating, I would actually like to see the image on the right side. So if we go back to the application, inside the upsert.cshtml, we have a row here. Let me cut this div and paste that before the buttons. Perfect, this still looks the same. Now what we will do is the row that we have here. Inside this row, let me add a div, give it a class of column 9. Let me cut that and I will paste it with the divs that we have. This time it will occupy less width. Perfect. Here we will display the image. So if we go back, I will press Ctrl KF to align everything here. And then let me minimize the column 9. we will be adding a new div here. So div, give it a class of column 3 because Bootstrap has total of 12 columns. We need to add an if condition because the image will only be loaded if this is an edit and not a create. So we will say model.menuitem.id. If that is not 0, then only we want to load image right here. So image src, and we need to get the source of the image. That is inside model dot we have the menu item dot image. Before I do anything else, let me go back and refresh the application. And perfect, we have the image here. Let me give that width of 100% and a border. With that, if we go back and refresh, now it looks much better. If we go back here and try to create, it won't display any image, so that looks good. So with that, the edit get functionality is looking perfect. The last thing that we want to work here is when we hit the update button, the records should be updated. Let's do that in the next video. In this video, we want to work on the update functionality of menu item. So if we go back to the application, we will have to work with the onPost handler right here. Our create is looking good. We just need to work on the else part, which is for update. When we are working with update, we want to retrieve the object from database. That way we can compare and update what we want. So we'll say variable obj from db is equal to underscore unit of work dot menu item dot we have get first dot default. We will say u goes to u dot id is equal to the menu item dot id. We have the menu item which is binded with bind properties, so that should work. Next we need to check if a new image was uploaded or not, because it is possible that if we go back we are just changing some data here and we do not want to update the image. So we will check here if files.count is greater than 0, that means that a new image has been uploaded for this menu item. In that case, we will have to do some things that we did when we were creating an image. So let me copy everything that we have here and paste it inside the if block. We will generate a new file name. That's perfect. We need the uploads path and the extension. Now before we upload the new image, we need to delete the existing image. Inside obj from db, we have the path to existing image. So right here, let's delete the old image. So we will say variable old image path is equal to, if we go to our database, we only have path from the images folder. We need the actual server path, and for that we will need the web root path. So if I go back here, we have the web root path using the host environment. So we will combine the paths here, so we can say path.combine, and we want to combine the web root path with the path that we have in database, so obj from db.image. Now if you examine, the image path starts with a forward slash. So we want to remove that forward slash when we are combining, so we can say trim start, and backward slash is an escape character, so we will have to type that 2 times. So that will give us the old image path that we have to delete. We will have to check if system.io.file.exist. If this particular file at old image path exists, then we will delete that. So to delete, we have system.io.file.delete the old image path. Once we delete the old image path right here, we will handle the new upload. So we have uploads, the new file name plus the extension. We will copy that, and then we will modify the image route with the new name. This should happen if a new image has been uploaded. If this is not the case, what you can do is to be on the safe side. You can just say menu item.image is equal to obj from db.image. Even if you don't write that, that is okay, because when we are updating, we are checking if image is not empty, only then we are replacing this image. but this is just to be on the safe side. After we handle everything related to image, we can go ahead and call our unit of work on menu items to update. And here we will pass the menu item that user modified. After that, do not forget the important step of saving your changes. Once the changes have been saved, we are redirecting back to the index page. This functionality looks good for update. Let's restart our application and test this out. Let me also open the folder where we have the image inside www images right here. So right now we have one image. That is great. Let me add it on the right side here. We go back to the menu item. Let's edit one of the existing items. And I'll change that to entree and vegetarian. Let's hit update. We get an error here because it is checking for the file where we did not upload. Let me go back and check that real quick. It's on line 61, as you can see here, right here. Now you might be wondering, why is it going inside create? It should be going inside the else loop because the ID should not be null. If we go back, the ID is 1 in the URL. But that does not matter. The reason it is going there is inside absurd, we do not have that ID in a hidden property. So when the form is posted, that ID is 0. So all that we have to do is inside the form tag, we need input ASP4. This will be menu item.id and it will be a hidden field. Let me add a double quote here and it will be hidden. With that change, let me save it and go back. Let me reload the page here, change this to entree, vegetarian, update. Great, you can see the category and food type is updated. Now let me bring up the image folder and try to upload a new image. Let's say sunset and hit the update button. Great, you can see the old image was deleted. A new image with a new grid has been created, and if you click edit, it is linked properly. So with this, our update functionality with menu item is working as expected. The last functionality that remains is delete. Let's take a look at that in the next video. Now we want to work on delete functionality with the menu item. So far what we have in other places is when we hit the delete button, it displays the delete page, and there when you hit delete, the category or the food type is deleted. With menu items, I want to do something different. I want to use sweet alerts here, so we will display a confirmation, and if the user submits yes there, then we will delete that menu item. Since we will be using sweet alerts, we will have to implement the delete inside our menu item controller. So it will be an endpoint inside the menu item API that we have. We only have HTTP GET here. We can copy that and paste it one more time. This will be HTTP delete. When we want to delete any of the menu item, we need the ID that needs to be deleted, so we will retrieve that ID in the parameter here. In order to delete, we will have to retrieve that entity from database. So we'll say variable obj from db is equal to unit of work. In there we have menu item dot get first dot default. We will get that based on the ID. So u.id must match the ID that we receive in the parameter. After that, on unit of work, menu item, we have the remove method where we need to pass the entity which is obj from db. Once we delete that, we need to call save changes. So unit of work dot save. After the delete is done, we will just return a JSON with success as true and message as delete success. But we also need one more thing here. When we delete a menu item, we want to delete the corresponding image that we have for that menu item. So that logic we already have inside absurd. So let me go to the code behind. We need the I web host environment using dependency injection. So let me add that in the controller as well. I will go back. Let me copy the private here and we will paste that, add the using statement, and underscore host environment is equal to host environment. If we go back to the upsert.cs html.cs, inside the else block, we have the old image path and we delete that right here. We will copy those 3 lines, go back here and paste that. We need to do path.combine to system.io and we need to get the web root path. That path is inside underscore host environment dot web root path. So we will extract that from there. We have obj from db where we have the image. We will delete the image and then we will remove the menu item. This looks great for HTTP delete for our menu item. The delete button that we have inside menu item.js right here, we need to call that API endpoint. Let's do that in the next video. On the link of delete here, we want to call a custom method in our JavaScript. So let me create that function down here. It will be a basic function. Let's just say delete and we'll have a URL that we will receive as a parameter. This URL will be the URL of our API endpoint. Let me open up, which is right here. We will have the link right here. So instead of href, we will be adding onClick method here. We want to call the delete function and we need to pass our URL, which is API/menu items. Let me make sure. Controller name, it is menu item, not items. Perfect. And along with that, we need to pass the ID that is expected right here. So if we go back here, we need to append the data. So I'll say plus here and then $sign with interpolation. We will pass data, which will be the ID. Once we have the URL, right here, we need to display alert. So far we have used data tables, but now we want to use Suite Alert for notification. If you click on the button here, it displays nice alert. What we want is more of a confirmation box. So first we need to add Suite Alert 2 inside our project. We will go to the installation tab and we have the link right here. We will copy that. Let's go back to our project. We will have to add that in underscore layout. I already have that open. We will add that at the very end with all the other script tags that we have. That looks good. Let's go back to our delete function. Then to get the exact confirmation box, let me click on examples here and I will search for then. The reason I'm searching for then is because we are waiting for a response. So if you hit try me here, we have 3 buttons. That is not what we want. If we scroll down, we have a confirm box and this looks good. We want yes deleted, and when the user hits confirm button, we want to call our API endpoint. So let me copy everything that we see here, go back and paste it right here. So on delete we want the confirmation, but once everything is confirmed, we need to call our API. We will be using Ajax and we need to do some configuration inside there. The first one is of course URL that we received in the parameter, so we can use that directly. Next is type of the request. This will be an HTTP delete request. Next, what we want, if that is successful, we want a function that will receive data here. And we need to check the success flag on data. If we examine the controller, when we are returning back the data, we have success as true and message is delete successful. So if we go back to the JS file, right here we can check if data.success. If that is true, this means the delete was successful. We will just reload our data table. Now for this reload, we will have to do one configuration. but I will show you that later on. Along with that, we can also display a success notification that we will do in just a few videos. Else we want a failure notification. Let me save this and run the application one more time. While this is running, let me go back to the controller and insert a temporary breakpoint. Let's go to our menu item. When you hit delete, we have our confirmation that is perfect. If this was not coming up, make sure you give a hard refresh by Ctrl F5 and try the delete button. If you hit cancel here, nothing happens. If you hit yes delete, it does not hit our breakpoint. So something is not right. Let's do F12 here and examine the errors that we have. You can see it is going to the endpoint API menu item with the ID, but it is not hitting our endpoint inside the API. And the reason behind that is inside the API, we forgot to define here that when we are using HTTP delete, it will get a parameter which will be ID. We need to explicitly define that, only then it will be able to map this endpoint. Once you have that change, if you try it again, that should work. And perfect, it hits our endpoint, the ID is populated, and when you hit continue, you can see the data table is not reloading. If you hit reload here, then it displays no data available. So how can we reload our data table? One way of doing that is if we go back to menu item.js, we added this data table.ajax.reload, but it does not know what exactly this data table is. So what we can do is whatever we added right here, we can store that in a variable called as data table. So let's create a variable data table at the top here. We can say data table is equal to, and we will load the complete data table right there. With that in place, let me save this, go back, refresh here, and create a menu item. Once we do this, let's hit delete again, and perfect. You can see now the data table is reloading. So with that, all the CRUD operations on menu item are now working perfectly. We already have the toaster notifications in our project, and if we go back inside the shed, we have the notifications partial view. So why don't we use that with data table? Inside the menu item.js, we can directly use toaster for notification. For success notification, we can use toaster.success, pass in the message that we have inside data, and for toaster.error, we will say toaster.error. Then right now, if we go to our underscore layout, we do not have toaster in here. So we only added that inside the underscore notifications partial view. We can copy this line, go back, and I will add the JS right here. I already have the jQuery, so that is not needed. Let me save everything here, go back to the application, and refresh here, and create a new menu item. Let's try to delete this, and perfect. We see delete successful. One last thing that I want to add here is on the image. When a user is trying to creating, if the image is not present in create, we want to display an error message using sweet alert that we added. So while the application is running, let's go back to the upsert view. And right now we have the same button for create and update. We only want that validation for create. So what we will have to do is we will have to break this down. So if model.menuitem.id is not equal to 0, then this is an update. So in case of update, we want the same button. Let's paste that, and we can directly use update. We do not need the if condition here. Looks good. In the else block, we need the same update button, but we want an on-click event for some validation. This will be create. I have the extra double quotes. And here we will add an on-click event, which will be return back from a function. Let me call that validate input. We will have to create this function. Let's scroll down. Inside the script tag here, we will add a function, validate input, where we need to get the upload box. I believe I had that here, and it's right here. We have the ID of upload box. So we can retrieve that, and I will say if document.getElementById, the ID is upload box. If that value is empty, that means that we have a validation error. So I want to use my sweet alert. Let me go back here, and we will use the basic sweet alert right here. That looks good. Let me go back and paste that. We don't want any footer, and inside the text we will say please upload an image. After this, make sure you return false because we do not want to submit the form if there is any error. Inside the else block or outside of this if, we will return true. Once we save this, let's go back and refresh the page. Let's hit the create button. And perfect, you can see our validation is working. Let's go back to the menu item. We don't have any. Let me create few menu items before we proceed in the next video. So perfect, I have added quite a few menu items. Let's continue in the next video.